for whatever reason, I needed that discomfort. I needed that suffering. Some part of me needed to go through that. And I just keep getting this image of it was like burning off what wasn't necessary. It was helping me release what I needed to let go to get to where I intended to be.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. What do you need to let go of? In her teens, alcohol became Carrie Chown's refuge from emotional pain. By her early college years, she was firmly in the grips of alcoholism. Carrie worked hard to keep everything looking shiny on the outside, but inside, she wanted to die. Then, she was diagnosed with pulmonary hypertension as a college junior and was told she had 2 years to live. Ironically, it felt like an answer to her prayer to die. In June of 1999, Carrie summoned the will and the courage to get sober so she could begin an IV treatment the following month. Remarkably, she survived 6 years with pulmonary hypertension and received a life-extending double lung transplant in December of 2003. After the transplant, Carrie was told that she might only have 2 more years to live. With a handful of years of sobriety and intensive recovery work now under her belt, Carrie emerged from the transplant physically, spiritually, and mentally aligned. She was ready to live. She moved out of her parents' house, started working, got married, and bought her first home. But she lost sight of all of the gifts in her life during an excruciating 7-year infertility journey. There's more to this story, and Carrie fills in the gaps in the conversation that follows. But what I've just shared with you sets the stage for the insights and wisdom that Carrie offers in this episode. At face value, it's a gripping tale of human suffering, perseverance, and the will to live. But on a deeper level, it's a masterclass in how to find freedom on the other side of letting go. Today, Carrie is a life, health, and wellness coach and Reiki master practitioner. She has a private practice in Woodland, California, where she uses traditional coaching, energy work, and unique life coaching experiences to help her clients move beyond the things that hold them back and create lives full of passion, purpose, and well-being. Okay, without further ado, let's dive into the conversation. Carrie, your story has 3 big surrenders in it. That's how you label them. You have a surrender associated with your addiction recovery, a surrender associated with your double lung transplant, that's just mind-blowing. A surrender associated with infertility. And in each case, you say you found new freedom on the other side of letting go. I'm starting with this question. This is one that really personally interests me as I consider areas in my life that I'm not letting go of in ways that I'd like to. And so that's why we're starting with this one. It's a selfish start. I hope that's okay with everybody. What specifically did you have to let go of? And how did it set you free in each of those instances?
I think when I start with the first one, with my recovery and my recovery from alcoholism, and actually surrender across the board for me is not about giving up. So I think so often people feel like surrender is giving up, right? It's like waving the white flag, I concede. And for me, surrender has been letting go of the idea that I know what's best for me. Letting go of the idea that the path that I'm on is the only path. So around that first surrender with my addiction, it was letting go of this idea that I couldn't live life any other way. Like I couldn't imagine living life without alcohol. And the thought of not drinking was impossible for me. But I had to let it go. I had to get sober if I wanted to live. That surrender was all about, I literally hit my knees in that moment of surrender. And I believed in something bigger than myself. I call it God. And I just said, I need help. I don't know how to move forward here. And so in that moment, I feel like I was just given this hope that there was potential to have a life, a different kind of life than what I was living. But it required me to be open to that and to say, I don't know how to move forward, and to call on the help that was available to me and be willing to accept it. And then it was just this walk into the unknown, complete unknown. So that's kind of how I experienced surrender. And when I moved through those 3 surrenders, the surrender around the double lung transplant, that to me was, I remember the moment where it happened, kind of like I do with the alcoholism. But I was laying in a hospital bed. I'd been in the hospital for about 42 days waiting for this gift of life to come. It was December 28th of 2003. I remember the evening. I was in San Francisco, so I had this gorgeous view looking out onto the city, all the lights of the city. And I remember, saying to God, to source, whatever's out there, I'm ready to let go. It's that letting go. I'm ready to stop fighting. I mean, I was fighting for my life at that point. I could barely get air in my lungs. My heart could barely pump blood through my body. And I was just completely exhausted. And so that was the only path that I was aware of, is just fighting to live. And so I let go of that and said, I'm ready for whatever else is next. Now, in my mind, I thought that would be death. I thought I was right up next to death, and I was ready to go to that place, whatever it is. I'd had some near-death experiences in the hospital during those 42 days before my transplant. And for me, it felt like such a peaceful experience. Like I was actually in this subconscious state. I felt like I was underwater, swimming toward this wall of light.
And are you speaking of the near-death experiences, or are you speaking of the moment of surrender?
Yes. Sorry, I'm kind of taking you back to this near-death experience, which is really what helped me to surrender.
Okay.
So in these near-death experiences, there was this wall of light, and as I approached it, I just felt so much peace and comfort. At that time, I was in a lot of physical pain. My body was shutting down, and days of pain and suffering and struggle. And when I would go into this place of feeling like I was close to death, there was just complete peace and ease. And so on that night, when I was in that moment of surrender, I felt like, okay, I'm ready to move into that. Whatever that is, I don't understand it. I just know that it feels better than what this is, the struggle that I'm in. And so I assumed that's what I was surrendering to. I thought for sure I was going to close my eyes and that I wouldn't wake up. That would be it. And I would move into whatever that big unknown. That's kind of the key to all of this. It's the unknown, but being willing to move into the unknown rather than this known that's not working for me, this known that's become such a struggle. And so to my surprise, I woke up on the other side of that surrender to my transplant. The next morning I was told they had found lungs for me. And so again, that was just a reminder that what I think I'm moving into may not be what it is. Like there may be a whole other path planned for me. And the surrender is the willingness to say, I don't know what it is, but I'm willing to go there.
One of the notes I jotted down was like, what are the common characteristics of these surrenders that you've had? And one of them sticks out to me is that surrender that produces the freedom that you speak of and produces this letting go that you speak of is unqualified surrender. It's not like, ooh, maybe if I surrender, then, I won't die. Or maybe if I surrender, then I'll get to drink later. Or is that accurate? It's an unqualified surrender. Unconditional surrender. That's what I'm looking for.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect way to put it. Because it's saying I'm surrendering to whatever is to come. Whatever it is. You're right. There are no conditions on it. It's basically saying I'm willing to let go of what I know, and I'm open to there being another solution or another option that's outside of my realm of possibility at this point.
And would you touch on the surrender associated with your experience of infertility, and then we'll kind of play around with some of the other takeaways from your experiences? Was there anything qualitatively different with that experience?
No, I think you captured that thread perfectly because, that third surrender with infertility was very similar. I would say it was the most painful of the three surrenders, which people often find interesting because they think, oh, the transplant wasn't the most painful. I mean, you walked right up to death and thought that that's for sure where you were going. And when I look back, really, it was the infertility that was the most painful, which really speaks to what a struggle that is for so many women. Our desire to have children and to not have that be fulfilled it's a whole different kind of pain. And it's an invisible pain, which makes it even harder, I think. But that surrender was all about me being completely committed to a path and completely attached to a path. I think that's the better word. I was so attached to this idea that I had to be a mom, that it had to happen for me, that I would not settle for anything other than that. And I was open to how that occurred. I mean, I knew that I couldn't have children because of all of my medical issues, and there were too many roadblocks there. It was actually impossible at the time. But I was open to, my husband and I had looked into open adoption. We'd looked into surrogacy. We'd looked into foster adoption through multiple agencies. I just wanted to be a mom of any child that came into our life. And basically, I was not willing to accept anything other than that. And we were on that path of trying to start a family for about 7 years. It was a very long and painful journey, lots of ups and downs. And we got to this place where, my husband says to me, you believe in signs. You live your whole life looking for signs and being open to guidance. And we have had every single door shut in our face. I mean, every single door. Like, we had a potential surrogate and then she backed out. We had another, and then her price was higher than we could afford. We enrolled with an open adoption agency and we were with them for 2 years and things were looking really hopeful. And then they went bankrupt and took all of our investment. We started with a foster adoption agency and then got some really discouraging news about foster adoption that kind of scared us. And, so this went on and on and on. And my husband finally just said, I can't do this anymore. Like, it really looks like the answer is that we don't have children. And I was so completely focused on this one thing that I didn't have that I had lost sight of all of the gifts in my life. When I had at the time this amazing life where I had received a transplant, like I think this ultimate gift, and I'm healthy and, I have this wonderful partnership with my husband and we have beautiful pets and nieces and nephews on the way and all these things. And I just couldn't see them. All I could see was this one thing I didn't have. And so for me, that surrender was about saying, again, I don't see another way. I don't see how I can move forward in this life without being a mom. But I can't make it happen. It's not happening for us. We've tried everything. And at this point, it's making me miserable. I mean, this dream is almost like a weight that is dragging me under. And I have this beautiful life on the surface of the water. And yet I'm refusing to let go of this thing that's drowning me. And so that surrender was just saying, I don't know how to let this go, but I know that I need to. And I don't think that it means that I'm letting go of the potential to be a mom. I mean, maybe that will happen in some way that I don't see, but me trying to make it happen, I have to let go of that. I have to release it. And so, like I said, with my addiction, I literally was like hit my knees. Well, with this surrender, I was like laying on the floor, sobbing. This was just breaking me in two. It was so painful. But I had to let it go. And so I did. I asked for help and I didn't know how I would do it, but I just said, please help me with this. And it was kind of like my sobriety. It was like all of a sudden, not in an instant. It wasn't like, oh, great, I'm great. Now I can move on with my life. But there was just this opening. There was just this crack of light that said, like, there's life for you on the other side of this. Come and see what it's all about. I did. And I let it go. Today in our life, we have 11 nieces and nephews. They are all around us. We live near many of them, and some of them we're meeting our niece for the first time who lives in Denmark. So we're going to visit family and meet her in a couple weeks. And I just think it's so amazing that we have all these beautiful children in our world that, that we cuddle with and play with and have adventures with. And then when we're exhausted, we get to give them back to their parents and we get to just focus on ourselves. So we have this really beautiful sweet spot that we've landed on. And I wouldn't have even been open to that before I surrendered my desire. But today it's amazing. It's really beautiful where we've landed.
And what is this freedom that you describe, a new freedom that you found on the other side of letting go? In what ways are you freer than you once were?
The biggest part of it for me is just this realization that there are so many more possibilities for us than we can see. Like there are endless possibilities out there for us. And being willing to let go of what holds me back from accessing those things, like that's the freedom. It's like having a way to go from like my limited view into this place where I can actually see and access all that's available to me. That's the freedom. And I can do that over and over and over again. I've done it in these 3 big instances, but I can do that every day of my life. I can say, hey, I'm kind of stuck in this area, or I'm kind of struggling with this relationship. I don't see a way forward, but I now know that if I say, maybe there is another way that I just don't see yet, and I'm willing to just let that possibility exist, then I can usually find it. And for me, it's like having access to, I believe that we have energy out there that's available to us all the time, just waiting to help. And all we have to do is call on it. And that freedom of knowing that there's so much assistance, and now I know how to get there. I know how to access it. That's the freedom that I'm referring to.
I was curious about that. If we listening were to take away, I have to have these moments of desperate surrender in order to experience the freedom, or if there's a nugget in your story that is available to all of us that doesn't require maybe, I guess I actually think each of us does need those moments of surrender in our lives in order to truly experience the freedom. But is there some way that you're now able to think and operate in the world that allows you to deploy the benefit of your moments of surrender without having to have the same kind of moment in surrender? What do you do in those moments? How do you use that?
Yeah, like for the average person who doesn't have a transplant or...
Right, yeah.
Yeah, these major moments that I've had. I think it's just, again, like willingness is the word that keeps coming to me. Being willing to believe there are options for us and there's more out there for us than we can see, but just willing to believe that it exists, willing to believe in the possibilities that we don't yet see manifested in our life. Just that, I think, opens up. So really, it just provides a lot of hope. I mean, that's a big part of it. That when we feel hopeless and we feel like there's just no solution here for whatever it is, it can be, the day-to-day struggles. I know so many of us right now, it's like, I can't afford to get a tank of gas, or I can't, whatever, it's like life is expensive and life is hard, and those can be big struggles. But the little things too, like I said, struggling in a relationship, bickering with someone that you love, and just feeling like, wow, I don't know how to do it another way. And being willing to say, just because I don't know and just because I don't see it right now doesn't mean that it doesn't exist.
So I know from what you've shared already, I think one of my takeaways will be simply in moments of stuckness or where I'm aware that I'm committed to only one result being the acceptable result. What I hope I'll be able to do is just to pause and say, hold on, remember Carrie's story, what other options could exist? And even if I can't come up with them, just being able to acknowledge to myself, there are other options than the one that I'm requiring be the only one. And this is such an interesting question to me because I've just over the past year have been, wrestling's probably the right word, with the tension between advancing boldly in the world toward things that call to us and that require a lot of us, and also acknowledging what is and accepting what is and welcoming whatever comes our way. I mean, in my heart and mind, I want to see it as an either or kind of thing. Either you're going out and creating, or you're sort of passively just accepting whatever is. And I'm nowhere near, where I'd kind of like to be in my management of that dynamic. The word push to me has become a 4-letter word. Like when I feel myself trying to push something into existence in the world, it usually ends up creating a lot of collateral damage in my life, emotionally, relationally, because as you've said, I'm insisting that something be, and I'm insisting that it be in the way that I've envisioned it. And when it's not apparent that things are going the way that I'd like, then it produces this whole host of negative collateral, emotional, and relational damage. So it's a really interesting question. And I think the word acceptance comes to mind, the negative consequences of attachment. And many philosophical and spiritual traditions, of course, talk about the negative consequences of attachment. Anything else you would add to this, kind of like your deepest takeaways from your experiences with surrender and the freedom you've experienced?
Well, I love that you bring in acceptance, because I think that that's a key component to this. I think maybe I have had, and maybe we as human beings kind of feel like if we accept what is, that we're settling for that. Like, okay, I accept this as my situation. That means I have to like it, or I have to deal with it.
Or like you're settling.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think that's the case. I think that when we stop fighting what is, and we say, okay, this is my reality, this is where I'm at, I'm just going to stop fighting it. It's like it frees up all of this energy. I do a lot of energy work, so I'll talk in energy a lot. It frees up all of this energy that you were using to fight reality to then move into like creation of possibility. So I think that's the key for me, is not saying I'm okay with what's happening necessarily. I may not like it. I mean, in my 3 surrenders, I didn't want to get sober. I didn't want to die. I wasn't ready to die. I mean, I was willing to if that was going to happen, but I wasn't going to choose that. And I certainly wasn't wanting to choose to not be a mother. But I accepted that, like, okay, well, this is where I'm at. This is the situation in front of me. And when I did that, it was like all of a sudden, all of the energy I was using to fight reality sort of was released. And then that opened my eyes to all these new possibilities and all these new ways of being. I love that you brought acceptance in, because I think that's what it's about. And I think we're so often afraid that if we accept reality, that it's like we're doomed to like, okay, well then this is what I have forevermore. And I don't think that's the case.
So in your experience, how do we know when it's time to stop fighting and time to accept and let go? Because it seems like you can think of a number of instances when fighting might be a good thing. Resisting what appears to be might be a good thing. At least you might be able to make an argument for that. So, or maybe it's never good to fight. I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think it's a really interesting question. I don't know. I want to explore this with you a little bit, because I believe there are times where fighting is helpful, right? Like fighting for what you want or what you know is right. We set big goals, right? And it requires us to like scramble up a hill to get there. And it's like that, it's all worthwhile though. It's all part of something that's really beneficial for us. So there's something about like the quality of the fight. Is the fighting bringing you, is it energizing you? Is it exciting you? Anyone who's, chosen, again, like I think about some big goal, like, if you decide to go back to school and it's like, wow, this is going to be tough. Like I have a lot of work ahead of me. I have a lot to learn. I have a lot that I have to do. But ultimately, this is moving me towards something that I'm really excited about. And even though it's hard work, it actually feels good to me. It energizes me. It moves me forward. Then there's the fighting that is draining, is exhausting. It's like where you're fighting a losing battle. And even though like this isn't taking me anywhere good, but I'm not willing to stop. That's the fighting for me. That when I feel that it is taking me down, and again, I think of that feeling like I had, like the sinking, the drowning, like this is taking me under, but I'm not willing to stop fighting, that's the fighting that I think is beneficial to say, I'm ready to let this go.
Well, as you're describing those two different types of fights, I think I really like the way you contrasted those. It makes a lot of sense to me. Maybe there are just fights that we have to fight until we have to surrender. In your 3 major surrenders in your own life, that was true. You fought until you had to surrender. For whatever reason, you reached a point where you couldn't fight any longer and you were willing to try a different way. And in each of those cases, those fights to the point of surrender produced new things in your life that probably couldn't have come in any other way. I mean, you had to fight it out until you said, okay. And then having gotten to the point where you said, okay, it opened up your horizon, your view to all of what could be. So maybe there's the good fight, and then there's the fierce fight that ends up good, but is brutal the whole way until the point of surrender. Maybe that's how we humans function, because I think if we were to say, you know what, I'm going to try that acceptance thing. That's sort of, again, trying to manipulate the process to our benefit before we're actually honestly to the point of being able to say, I do give up. I don't know. We can noodle on that for a while. I like that thread a lot. I'm learning a lot from that.
I think you're touching on something really important in that this is such a unique and personal experience, right? For each and every person.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I couldn't have surrendered at any other point in any of those processes than when I did. So there was something in me that knew, okay, it's time. And I'm sure others around me were watching going, why doesn't she give this up? This is ruining her life. This is making her miserable. I mean, people said that to me. Why don't you let this go? And I would just say, I can't let this go. I don't know. That kind of begs the question, were there things that I still needed to learn along that path, or that whatever things that I needed for myself to ultimately get to that point of surrender? Yeah, I think so. For me, there were things that I needed to do. So I think that's true for each and every person that finds themselves in this situation. So it kind of comes back to trusting yourself and just really listening. That there's that inner voice that's saying, it's time to let go. And maybe we don't listen when it's whispering. We wait until it's yelling in our ear, and then we're finally willing. Maybe not. But just trusting, trust yourself, trust your own process. It's not going to look like anyone else's, and that's okay.
My current favorite quote is from Carl Jung, who said, what we most need will be found where we least want to look. I think you're a great example of someone who has found what you most needed in places that you never wanted to look and fought desperately to not have to look, but has produced some beautiful things in your life. And, your story and the fierce fight that you've put up until those points of surrender is now producing fruit in the lives of friends and family and your clients who you work with as a coach, because you've been there. Using the hero's journey illustratively, you've been to the underworld and collected the treasure that was behind the dragon of all of these surrenders that you've had to go through. And you've brought that gold back to the quote normal world for the rest of us to benefit from. And it's a beautiful process. I mean, tremendously painful. None of us knows what it was like for you. I mean, to be laying in bed hoping for a transplant, but barely able to get enough air. I mean, nothing feels more desperate to me than that, unless it was maybe my child in that situation. You've been there. And so your account has just so much value and credibility for us. And for sure, this is something that I'm going to try and, however I can, put into place in my own life. You mentioned hope a minute ago, which is a good transition to another question I wanted to ask you. And you've gone from being physically healthy, but emotionally and spiritually sick and wanting to die, to being emotionally and spiritually healthy, but physically sick and wanting to live, to then having a new lease on life with new lungs after your transplant and trying then to produce new life in your own family, to losing that dream to infertility. And it just strikes me as this monstrous roller coaster of hope and loss. And I'm really curious to know what your relationship with hope is like today.
Describing it as a roller coaster is very accurate. When I kind of think about the timeline and I think, oh yeah, that's exactly how it's been. I mean, today I'm extremely hopeful. Just in general, I'm a hopeful person. And I think that just comes from trusting that no matter how hopeless things look or feel, and I'm sure I'll get to some other point in my life where something feels hopeless, I trust that there's always potential for that to turn around. Life has shown me that no matter how hopeless I am, it's like there's hope on the other side of whatever this is.
And when you say other side, by the way, I mean, from your near-death experiences, you're also talking about the other side, right? I mean, you take that's one of the other sides that you bring into that as a possibility.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is interesting to me as you describe yourself as someone that's hopeful, because I think you could just as easily be someone who was traumatized and embittered and hopeless because on multiple occasions, what you wanted didn't pan out. And that's why I'm curious. I'm really intrigued to hear you say that you're a hopeful person and your experiences have fortified your hope more than reduced it.
Well, I guess, this is really simplistic. And I've been challenging myself lately to say, I can make things easy or I can make them hard. That's a choice that I get. And sort of the easy answer is it feels better to be hopeful. It just feels better to me. And you're right. I could take everything I've been through and I could focus on the dip in all those stories, right? The hopeless moment, the low point of the roller coaster, and say, oh, that's been my life experience. But that just doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good to stay in those places. It doesn't mean that there's not value there. And it doesn't mean that when you're feeling hopeless and down, there has to be a place for that. I've certainly had my moments where, like I said, in those moments of surrender, I was hopeless. I felt like there's no other solution for me other than to let go, give up, give in, surrender, whatever you want to call it. But then on the flip side of that were these moments of hope and joy and beauty and love. Like all of that was available to me, even though I maybe didn't see it, from my vantage point of hopelessness. So yeah, like simple answer is it just feels so much better to focus on those things. And that's a choice that I get today. I can look back on my story and say, where do I want to put my energy? And I want to put it in those places that made me feel good and that made me feel connected and that made me feel hopeful. Again, back to that. So that's what I do. And I don't know if that's just part of who I am. I mean, maybe it is. My parents said that I came out like I was born with a big smile on my face. Like I was just happy to be here. And so maybe that's just part of me. But I think I've also learned that, like I've talked about here, like with this choice, like I've learned we do have a choice. At any moment in time, we get to choose where we put our focus. I use that awareness to say, like, okay, I can choose to be hopeful or hopeless. And I choose to be hopeful because it just feels so much better.
And sometimes we think that the opposite feels better, doesn't it? Because we choose to wallow in our self-inflicted misery, or even misery that's been externally inflicted upon us. We choose to wallow rather than consider what could be done in this moment. Choice. Boy, it's hard to overestimate the power of choice. And I mean, that really is a superpower that each of us has been given if we choose to exercise it. You made a statement on your website. You said, healing can occur without physical recovery, and a shift in perspective can transform a disaster into a gift. What do you mean by that?
For me, specifically around what was happening, right before my transplant, and you read what I had said about, I had been in this place of being physically healthy, but emotionally and spiritually sick, and wanting to die, even though I had this healthy body. And through my process, mainly of recovery and of really healing myself spiritually and emotionally, I got to this place where I was physically very sick. My body was dying. It was shutting down. And yet I had healed internally. It was like the healing at my core of me, that part of me that's even deeper than my physical self. People may call it like my soul. My soul had healed to the point that I was at peace with whatever happened. So it didn't require physical healing. At that point in time, I did not have a healthy physical body. And yet I felt whole. I felt healed. And I felt at peace with whatever was going to happen, whether that was life or death in front of me, which I felt like I had no control over. So I think that's what I mean by that, is we don't have to have, like you were saying, if things don't work out the way we want them to, that's not a requirement for us to feel whole and to feel healed. And the disaster to a gift, of course, is all of these things that I've experienced, these things that look like the very worst moment in my life, life on the other side of recovery without alcohol, and life on the other side of transplant, and then life on the other side of the infertility struggle. I think the joy that I've experienced on the other side of each of these things, the connection that I've experienced with others who are in that struggle, with my transplant, it's like the amazing experience of receiving a gift that another family gave when they were at their very worst moment in their life, and that they chose to give this life. My donor was a 16-year-old boy, and he died very unexpectedly. And his parents said yes to donation. And I just think like, wow, because I received a transplant, I also got to experience that gift of a family being completely and totally selfless, and me being the recipient of that. Like, wow, that's amazing. That's a gift that I have experienced and I get to carry with me. And I wouldn't have had that. If I had been a totally healthy person and never needed a transplant, I would not know what that gift felt like. So that's like the disaster to a gift. And, recently I've had people in my life that are struggling with infertility, and they've come to me and said, when you talk to me about that experience you had of not being able to see the beauty around you because you were focused on this one thing you didn't have, like that stuck with me. That's been like a light in my darkness, and I'm coming out of it now. And thank you for sharing that with me. And I just think, oh my gosh, like the joy of getting to help another human being in that way. I wouldn't have had that to give if I hadn't gone through my struggle. And of course, in recovery, man, I experience the gifts of that every single day with the beautiful women and men that I walk that program with. And so, yeah, there's like all this beauty on the other side of the hard stuff. And again, I keep using that word, the other side, like it's like you pop over to this other place, but that's almost how it has felt.
Well, yeah, that must be accurate in some sense. It strikes me that, our story and our purpose in the world are inseparable. And when we're in our story, but we resist what's happening, then I think we're really resisting our unique purpose in the world. We're resisting letting ourselves be and do who we can be and do what we can do. And as you're talking, an image came to mind of someone, walking resolutely in one direction towards something that calls to them, or just in a direction that they'd like to move, and then running into a brick wall. There are a couple options in that moment. You can begin to assemble tools to break through that brick wall. You can bring someone in to help you examine the wall. But it strikes me that maybe one of the better approaches in that moment is to just kind of step back and look at the wall. Oh, a wall. What's this wall about? Is there a way around it? Can I get over it? Is it temporary? If you find that it appears to be impassable, then you go, okay, well, I guess I'll head this direction a little bit. And just seeing those obstacles in our life, the Stoics, I know Ryan Holiday's book is called The Obstacle is the Way. I don't know if that's a Stoic saying or not, but that's what the title of his book. And, I think there's some connection here with what you're saying, that the obstacle can be the way. And for me and for the listeners, I think that's certainly something that can be deployed right away is when you encounter something that appears to be an obstacle, kind of step back and see what it is. What's this about? Maybe it's me who's putting up the obstacle. Maybe it's an actual obstacle that isn't for me to be able to move. Okay, so what then? Let me open up. Let me pick up my eyes. Let me look around. Let me see what else I can see. And I do think, to your point, gosh, I think we all know people who have experienced disaster and it's destroyed them. And we know people like you who have experienced disaster and it's transformed them. If it's not the key ingredient, it must be certainly one of the top 2 or 3, simply the way that we choose to view that disaster and what we choose to make of it. Eventually, after the 3 surrenders we've talked about, you realized that you loved your life, but you hated your work. and you decided you hadn't gone through everything you did to feel unfulfilled. Like haven't gone through all this to not enjoy my days. So you took a leap of faith and left your job, and you found your purpose as a life coach and Reiki. Am I saying Reiki right? Reiki?
Yes, Reiki, yeah.
Practitioner. For everyone out there who maybe is considering a bigger step or a leap of faith, as you put it, I'm just curious, having made that step, how do you evaluate it? You glad you did, not glad you did, mixed results? What's your read on it?
Well, I can say with 100% certainty, I'm glad I did it. It was, there was this moment where, just like you said, I was looking at myself and just saying, there is no way that I have done all of this that I've done to be here and to recover and to feel whole and to be healthy, to go to a job every single day that I don't enjoy. And for me at that point, it was not enjoying it. I really hated it. I hated my work. And, I would go to my office and I would just feel like a little part of me dies every day that I do this. And my husband thought that was a bit dramatic, but I thought, with everything I've been through, I don't think it's dramatic to say that, I'm here. I feel like I'm here for something bigger. And maybe that's not even fair, because I think there are people who haven't had major struggles and they still feel like I'm here to do something big, right? So when you have that awareness that you're here to do something bigger or different, something other than what you're doing, and you don't answer that call, it can be a high price on your body and your soul to stay stuck in this thing that's not right for you. So I guess that was actually another point of surrender, because it was a complete leap of faith. I didn't know what else I wanted to be. It's not like I said, oh, I have the answer. I've always wanted to do this. I'll go do that instead. I just knew that I couldn't do what I was doing. And I was very lucky in that my husband has a wonderful job, and he was a willing partner and said, okay, I'm a little bit afraid of this, but go ahead, try something else. And so I took this huge leap of faith. And because I was so miserable in my work, I almost had to step away from that and sort of just take a moment to pause. And it reminds me of what you're talking about with the brick wall. Because I was so used to just every day banging my head on that brick wall of the work that I was doing, that I actually had to stop, back up, take a look at the bigger picture and say, okay, what else is possible here? I just took some time for myself, and the main thing that I did is I started looking around and looking at what people were doing and talking to people about their work. And when I saw people that seem to be happy and balanced and content and present, I would say, what do you do for work? Tell me about your journey. And so I just collected a lot of stories. And I hired a coach because I wanted some guidance on how to do this, like how to find my passion and my purpose. And the work that I did with her was so exciting to me and so rewarding and so helpful and clarifying that my mother-in-law gave me a little push. She said, wow, you've done some great work with your coach. Have you ever thought about being a coach yourself? And I went, oh, well, that sounds like a pretty cool idea. So I looked into it and I found a school that really felt good to me and enrolled. And, it's like the rest is history. That was 2.5 years ago. And I love this work. I love being a guide for someone who's feeling lost, who's feeling stuck, whether or not, like I said, they've been through major life struggles like I have. It just doesn't matter. If they're asking the question, why am I here? What's my purpose? I feel like I want to be doing more, but I don't know what it is. I just love helping someone navigate those questions and stepping back from what they've been doing, banging their head against the brick wall of their own and saying, what else might be possible? What have you not considered? What are you not seeing that's maybe right in front of you? And that often happens to be the case, right? That there's like, oh my gosh, if I hadn't asked the question, I wouldn't have seen that there's this whole other option for me over here. So that was a really scary moment, letting go of the security of the work that I had, but it was 100% worth it. I love my job. I love it. And it's not really a job. It's just part of my life. It's what I do today. That was a great decision.
It's so cool how your story has led you to an even deeper understanding and application of your purpose. A story you never would have scripted for yourself, wished upon anyone else, but it was a story perfectly designed for you to get out of you and into the world the things that you're uniquely capable of bringing into the world, which is, among many things, healing, renewal, purpose, passion in other people's lives. And that changes the world. That's no joke. That's no small thing, because the world changes at the level of the individual. And that's the work that you're now able to do because you've persisted through the most difficult parts of your story. That's beautiful. With the benefit of hindsight, how do you view the suffering in your past today?
I guess today I'm trying to decide if this is true, but I think it was necessary for me. I don't know why, really. I can't answer the why. There was some part of me, it was like that suffering was part of my transformation. I think about the things that are born of diamonds being born of like the pressure, right? And beautiful glass sculptures being born of like the fire, the heat that's created. It's like the beauty that comes out of a lot of discomfort. And for whatever reason, I needed that discomfort. I needed that suffering. Some part of me needed to go through that. And I just keep getting this image of it was like burning off what wasn't necessary. It was helping me release what I needed to let go to get to where I intended to be. Was it enjoyable? No. It was really hard. There were so many moments where I thought I couldn't make it another day. I think about the different layers of suffering because the emotional and spiritual suffering felt different than the physical suffering, but they were all equally hard. And yet they transformed me. I think that's what it was. It was like I see the suffering as the transformative piece. And because I allowed it to be transformative, I could have just decided, well, this is who I am. I'm a person who suffers. I'm a person who struggles, and decided not to go through the transformative process. Like I'm thinking of a butterfly that refuses to leave the cocoon, right? Like I could have just said, I'm just going to stay in this place because even though it's not comfortable, it's what I know. And so I'm going to choose that. But instead, I chose to allow it to change me. I think that's what it is. I let it change me.
Maybe that's part of the value of the fight we were talking about earlier, that you didn't acquiesce midway along those journeys of suffering. You kept fighting with everything you had to the point that you could fight no longer, and then you were able to be transformed by it. Those metaphors you mentioned, the diamond all under all the pressure, or the fire burning away the undergrowth in a forest. We love to use those metaphors, but in someone else's life, I see you being transformed like the diamond under the earth, all this pressure, and that's what's happening. So, stick with it. But we turn that metaphor around back on ourselves, and we will fight that with everything we've got. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if any of us experiencing some point of stuckness or some fight that we can't win, or maybe it's time to apply those kinds of metaphors to ourselves and realize that we're in a part of our story that will yield something. We just need to stick with it. And I love Winston Churchill's quote, if you're going through hell, keep going. I think there's just tremendous wisdom in that. Keep going. You don't know what fruit will be produced here, but there is fruit at the end of this journey. And your story certainly shows that. You didn't use the word gratitude, so I don't want to put it on you, but I'm curious if gratitude fits at all in the way that you relate with the suffering in your past. You said it was necessary in order for you to experience the transformations that were in order for you. But does gratitude fit or not?
Oh, yeah. I think gratitude is a huge piece of it. As you were talking about kind of reflecting back what you'd heard from me, I was thinking that the suffering for me serves as like a point of contrast. Like sometimes we don't know what we want until we know what we don't want. And so I think for me that suffering was was really showing me like, well, this path isn't going to work for me. And that's painful. I don't want to stay there. And it was all these points of clarity, not through anything that felt good, but like, it was like that doesn't feel good. So I don't want to be there. So it served me in that sense of creating contrast. And then that contrast helped me to look the other direction and say, what might be on the other side? If I don't want to be here, then where else might I go? And that shifted my attention and my focus. And through that, I found these other gifts that I've landed on. And then, yes, absolutely. I mean, I am so grateful for every single thing in my life. And sometimes people will say, you're grateful that you're an alcoholic. You're grateful that you had this terminal illness. You're grateful that you weren't able to have children. And from this vantage point, yes, I'm grateful. Because of, I don't know, the only word that's coming to me, it's like the depth and quality of the life that I experience today. Because I have experienced such hard things, I also experienced the flip side of that, which is just like the height of joy that is in my life today, and the beauty around me and the love that I experience. Like I don't think you can appreciate those things unless you know what it's like to not have them. Health, for sure. I mean, I am so grateful for my body. I know what it feels like to not be able to breathe. I know what it feels like to not be able to stand up and walk across a room. And today, one of my very favorite sports, I'm an avid mountain biker. I mountain bike maybe 3 times a week. And as I am pedaling up the side of a mountain, and every muscle is firing and I'm sweaty and it's hard. And I just think, what a miracle. And my lungs, are just pulling in as much air as they can get. And my body does this beautiful job of supporting me in that process. And it's like, wow, what a miracle that I can go from where I was to this place. So I'm extremely grateful. And I think I just keep that as that's just part of my daily awareness. I say thank you all the time. In those moments, I say, thank you, body. Thank you for what you're doing for me. When I'm playing with my nieces and nephews and they're laughing and we're giggling and my nephew says to me, let's cuddle, and he's 6 and he's like started school and he's a little bit too cool for me now, but he'll have those moments of like, will you cuddle me, Auntie? And it's like, oh my gosh, I am so grateful for this moment right here, right now. Mm. So yeah, gratitude is a huge part of my story and staying connected to it.
And today you're still a walking miracle. I mean, you have far outlived, I think based on an earlier conversation, the general medical prognosis for a double lung transplant. I mean, double lung transplants are, that there's any survivability is remarkable enough, but you've lived years beyond normal life expectancy. So not only have you danced with mortality for many years now, you're currently doing that. I mean, you're a statistical anomaly. How has that lifelong dance with mortality influenced the way you live today?
Well, I think this speaks to the work that you do and what you're doing with this podcast and your coaching, is just having this awareness that life is not to be taken for granted. I don't know if I'll be here tomorrow. And that can sound kind of cliche. People will say, I can be hit by a bus and not be here tomorrow. But you really could be, right? Like we say these things as if it's not going to happen to me. And then you become someone who's diagnosed with a terminal illness and you're like, wow, I just assumed I would have time. I just assumed I could deal with that tomorrow and I could go for that dream next year and I could change my job once I'm vested for my retirement, right? Like these things that we make decisions with the assumption that we have time. And I don't live that way anymore. I mean, I am so grateful to be as healthy as I am today. And yes, against all the odds. I mean, I'm well beyond 18 years post double lung transplant. I'm like an old timer at my clinic, my hospital.
You look amazing. Like if I walked up and saw you on the street, none of your story would be evident to me. I mean, you're the picture of vitality and vibrancy and health.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it is such a miracle. And then I hold it with that, again, I'm going to use the word contrast of, this is a gift. I'm on borrowed time. You and I have talked about that. I'm on borrowed time, and I don't take that for granted. So I'm not going to put things off. And I don't want to say this to discourage people. Look, if I open my closet doors and look at the stack of papers that need to be filed in there, it's not like I am on top of every single thing and I do life perfectly and I don't put anything off. I'm still a human being. I still have bad days. I still procrastinate on things I don't want to do. But in general, when it comes to the big stuff, when it comes to, having that urge that I should call someone, like call that person you haven't talked to in a while. I don't put those things off because I don't know why I'm getting that urge. Maybe I won't be here tomorrow. Maybe they won't be here tomorrow. Maybe they just need some support today. But those things, when it comes to connection, I guess that's what I've said that a few times in our conversation. When it comes to my relationships with people, when it comes to really experiencing joy and, like those are the things I don't wait on that. Just do it today because I don't know. I don't know how long I'll be here. But if I died tomorrow, I wouldn't have any regrets. Not a one, which is pretty amazing because I think back on, places I've been in my life and think, oh man, I definitely couldn't. There are times I would not have been able to say that, but I can say that today for sure.
What a wonderful, freeing thing to be able to say and a wonderful, freeing way to be able to live.
Yeah.
Do it today.
Do it today.
What do you hope we all take away from your story? If there was one thing you could bottle and each of us would ingest just as intended, what might that be?
Oh, it's hard to distill it down to one.
Doesn't have to be one. It can be more than that.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things that comes back to me is the piece around hope. If you don't like where you are, give it an hour or a day or a week, it will change. Right. And I use that in both ways. Like, I think if you're in a hard place, know that like, you're not going to be here forever. This is a moment in time and trust that it will pass. And on the flip side, if you're in an amazing, beautiful time in your life or an experience in your life, be there, be present, live it, experience it, because it's also not going to last. An hour, a day, a week, a year from now, like things will be different. It's just the way life goes. It is messy, and we, as human beings, we experience the whole gamut of emotions. I don't know, it's like using that understanding that I've gained that things are temporary. So whether it's hard or whether it's amazing, just know that it's not gonna be here forever. So use that to help you to either be hopeful that, yeah, it will be different. I can get through this because it's not going to be here forever. Or, yeah, I'm going to really experience this moment. I'm going to let it sink in. I'm not going to be distracted by my phone or whatever I'm worried about or whatever. Like, I'm really going to be here and experience it because I'm not taking this for granted. I think that's the big thing. It's just not taking things for granted. Being present, being alive, experiencing life, all of it. Like, the highs don't feel as good without the lows. They just don't. That's the whole deal that we're going through. It's really letting ourselves experience all of it, not fighting it. Experience all of it.
Experience all of it. Yeah. I love that. How can our listeners connect with you?
My website is carriechown.com. I'm also on Facebook. You can find my link, though, to all of my social on my website as well. So that's really the best place to go. I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. Come and find me. And, I'm really excited about this new program that I've just developed, which, I mentioned the mountain biking as my favorite hobby at this point in life. And I really decided recently that work should be fun for me. Maybe not everyone finds their work fun, but I thought, why not have fun and work at the same time? why can't these things coexist? So I just created a program that I launched in the last couple weeks that's a mountain biking life coaching experience for women. So I'm taking women out on the trail and, riding a bike and being out in nature and reconnected to your body provides all of these really cool opportunities for coaching. So that's something I'm super excited about that you can find on my website. Check that out. And I would love to talk to anyone who resonates with my story or who's struggling and could use some help. That's what I'm here to do, is to be a helper, to be a guide.
Awesome. And I'm 100% confident that you are an amazing helper and guide to anyone who's able to partner with you personally and or professionally. Thank you so much for your investment of time and energy and wisdom in this conversation today for my benefit, the benefit of the listeners. And I want to remind all of you out there, remember, you are going to die, but you're not dead yet. So get after it. Letting go is not a popular idea in our hard-driving Western culture, but one has only to consider how physically and mentally unhealthy our culture is, unprecedentedly so, in fact, to realize that there's much about how we live today that needs to change. So perhaps letting go is something all of us need to practice more. Letting go of our demand that life be a certain way and accepting what actually is instead. Letting go of our demand that our partner meet all of our needs and assuming full responsibility for our own well-being instead. Letting go of our tireless efforts to prevent future catastrophes and accepting that much of the future is completely outside of our control. Letting go of our need for our kids to fit our mold and nurturing their unique qualities instead. Examine your own heart and observe your own life to discern where a surrender might be calling to you. Look especially closely at those areas in your life where you consistently experience a sense of stuckness and frustration, a pushing back from life as it resists your repeated attempts to create a different reality. What freedom awaits you on the other side of letting go? What stuck with you from this episode? Message me on Facebook, Instagram, or LinkedIn at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. I'm taking a creative break in July to have adventures with my family and give my heart and mind an opportunity to reset and be refreshed. The show will return in August with 2 episodes that I'm really looking forward to. From her own heart-rending experiences with loss and caregiving, Michelle Matai will teach us how to have the hard conversations with our loved ones about end-of-life issues now, before end-of-life issues become a reality. And terminal brain cancer warrior Pam Blackburn will offer her final word from the sacred space she now inhabits between life and death. If these sound like hard episodes to look forward to, much less listen to, then lean into the discomfort and tune in anyway. They might just be the episodes that you especially needed to hear. I'm so glad you tuned in today. And don't forget to follow the show. I'll see you again in August on Andrew Petty is Dying, Lord willing, and the creek don't rise.